probably studio stuff in the basement, but I don't know if I'm gonna have room for that.
Right. I say go.
All right.
If Justin comes, we can catch him up.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for coming out. Thank you for your participation this week, this past 2 days. Um, I've got a lot of stuff to show you, considering we met for the first time yesterday morning. And we talked a lot about the pre-existing brand system that was developed in 2011, and then there were just a lot of different things that came up yesterday that I tried to kind of weigh in on past experience. You all are a veteran program. You've got a great board, and being able to use this opportunity to really just highlight how to streamline some of the processes. We heard complaints about how we had a system, but maybe we didn't really roll it out like we should because we didn't know how. And I would actually argue that maybe part of the reason you didn't roll it out better was because it was really hard to use. And we're going to make some recommendations on how to make that stuff easier. So what I always like to do with this is I like to start by digging into some of the logistics, stuff that you wouldn't typically think that you're going to talk about when you look at branding. But I think that I know, at least for me, coming from an urban planning background, I like to know a little bit about what's going on from an economic standpoint. So one of the first things I like to do is look at what's called inflow, outflow. Pretty much every time you go into a community, people will describe it as being a veteran community. That's because they know their friends and neighbors that have to leave town to go to work every day, but they don't necessarily know the people that have to come into town to work every day. So what you see here is in the city of Niles, you have about 4,469 jobs. Every day you have 3,784 people who drive into the city limits to work. You have 685 people that live here and work here. And then you have 3,641 that leave every day to go to work. So believe it or not, you actually have more people that go to Niles to work than leave Niles to work. So typically the thing that you think you know isn't always backed up by the actual data. Now, the next thing that you have to kind of understand with numbers like this is where are they going and what kind of jobs are they doing. So I want to make sure that I'm doing this right. So what these two radar charts show is they show the geographic direction that people are traveling. And then the color is showing you the distance. So the longer the section, the more people are going that direction. And then the lighter the color, the farther they're going. This radar chart is talking about the people that leave town to go to work. Overwhelming majority from a number standpoint are driving south. That's not surprising to anybody. The interesting thing is the next largest section is driving to the northeast and is driving really far, 60 miles or farther. Okay? So it's kind of an interesting nuance. I think everybody expects that South Bend is going to be a job center. Now, when we start to look at this is where the people are coming from to work here. You got a lot of people that are traveling in from the northeast and traveling a long way to work here. So, you also have people that are coming up from South Bend. So there's some interesting data in there. I'll take screen caps of all of that. What it actually does is it even shows you the job concentrations of where they're working in your city limits. It's all through the U.S. Census Bureau, so it's easy to get, but it is just one of those things where the biggest thing that I try to tackle is everybody leaving the community to go to work? Because if they're not here during the day, it's harder for them to know about things. It's harder for them to feel connected with the retail community, and what are we doing to establish those retail ties? And then the final thing that I'll show is this is just kind of a breakdown of what those people are making from a salary standpoint, the bottom categories. So what you have is the people that are, the jobs that are here, about 30% of them are making $3,333 a month or higher, while the people that are leaving, 32%. So the people that are leaving town are slightly more affluent. They have slightly better jobs. I don't think that really surprises anybody. And you would guess that those more affluent are probably going more to the south. So all that stuff kind of fits in. Again, all those numbers are specifically for the Niles city boundaries. Now, what I'm going to talk about next is retail leakage. The retail leakage, I did a different study area for this. What I did is I went to the center of downtown and I did a 15-minute drive time. So 15 minutes in all directions. I wanted to make sure that I did not have a drive time large enough to go down into the South Bend market because that's going to skew all of our numbers. But what a retail leakage analysis allows you to do is it looks at what the customers in a geography spend compared to what the stores in that geography sell. So it creates a window of these are the business opportunities that make the most sense because the money already exists. We don't have to invent the money, we just have to capture it here. So the overall market in that 15-minute drive time is over $400 million. Consumers are spending over $400 million in a 15-minute drive time. There are a couple categories that stick out as being particularly ripe for capture. 7.4 million in home furnishings and furniture stores. These are the type of stores that are appropriate in our downtowns, probably leaning more towards home furnishings than furniture. It's a harder business these days. This is not necessarily a downtown one, but 23.7 million leaking the trade area in grocery store sales. Typically what we start to see is a $30 to $33 million sales tends to be a typical chain grocery store. So once you start to hit in that $30 million mark, you can guarantee that chains are starting to sniff. The data's a couple years.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
This is just city limits still, so this
No,
is,
this is 15-minute drive time.
okay, but outside of the city limits, so even including the township.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anybody in that 15-minute in all direction. So, you know, a lot of those people, there is going to be, obviously, as you start to travel south, we know that there's going to be a hard break where those customers are traveling down to do their shopping anyway. So it's not, one of the things that this shows us is typically when you see a number like this, you might be seeing an alternative grocery store, an Aldi, a Lidl, some of these chains that are growing in smaller square footprints that are trying to capture some of these numbers before they get so big that a big one goes in to take it over. So chances are you probably have some interest in that particular field. The other thing that's nice about this is it reinforces, we know a little bit about the history of the farmers market and construction and it going away and not really coming back. This data actually shows that there is the potential, not for an event-based market, but for the potential of a more constant, present, fresh produce or an expansion of that fresh produce presence in the market. Is that you guys' business? The cool like farm? Okay, awesome. Yes, so obviously this is really good for that type, and it gets more specific in the category, and it would actually show exactly what happens when we break down into specialty food, which is going to fit into that more produce orientation. And I have the full PDF that I'm going to share with you all in a market data folder so you can dig into that stuff. And if you have any questions.
So this number here is the leakage.
This is the leakage. Yeah.
From the city.
Absolutely.
I got a question for you on your Aldi's comment.
Yep.
So I know that like in large industry, they have people that are just constantly looking for the market where where you're going to build a factory.
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying that your example with Aldi's, they have people that are just constantly crunching these numbers to see who has the most leakage?
Absolutely. There's a certain amount of economic development fallacy that exists in the world where they think that major corporations don't locate places because they haven't been invited.
Right.
What we're using, the Claritas data, Claritas and Esri, these folks are out there and they're constantly monitoring these numbers. It's funny, some are better than others, and some companies have become you know, the little fish that swim on the underbellies of shark and just eat the leftover. Um, you know, we've actually seen a lot of that happen where CVS might be really good at tracking this, where Walgreens might be more lazy. So they just wait to see what CVS is going in and then they build there too. Or, you know, Lowe's might be a little bit more aggressive in one place and Home Depot or Menards is just kind of creeping along by. So, but yes, absolutely. The fact is, these numbers are going to start triggering folks that are looking for areas. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's been a connection between a market that's ripening and an available property that makes sense or things like that. But you can guarantee that once you hit a certain threshold, those industries have seen you probably before you realize you were ready. So this simply gives you as a community the opportunity to speak with the same level of expertise that they would have and say, hey, you know, we realize that based off Claritas data, our leakage numbers are starting to hit. And they're like, oh, well, these people might know what they're doing. And then you can just pretend it and fake it till you make it. Health and beauty stores, 6.5 million. Again, this is really, that's a good number for that. Restaurants, 7 million. We typically see with a mom and pop capture, you can look at just under $1 million to 1.5 on most sit down downtown type restaurants. So you've got plenty of room with this kind of food genre to continue to go. And then the nice thing about dining is not an equilibrium formula. This is the kind of thing where you can absolutely become a dining destination and then you can far outpace your market. You have to have that critical mass and that saturation to achieve what they call dining destination status, where the consumer's less concerned about the specific destination and more about going to the geography and figuring out what they're going to eat once they get there. And then giant number in clothing, $11 million. The interesting thing about clothing and clothing boutiques, especially as they relate to downtown, clothing is a cluster buying industry. So if you have somebody who sees this and says, I'm going to go out and try to open a women's boutique, you might not necessarily see them succeed, even though the market is saying plenty of people are spending. If you have 3 that try to open at the same time, their likelihood of being successful is far, far greater. We see the same thing with art galleries. We see the same thing with antiques. Everything's not the same thing. You don't want 3 artisanal candy shops to open at the same time. But, you know, with clothing and fashion, definitely can work. It doesn't all have to be new. It could be a mixture of new, kids, vintage, consignment, but having that mix is something that you want to kind of target.
How do these numbers relate to internet shopping in the same areas?
So what happens is these numbers actually report internet shopping. The internet shopping typically on average in most markets is hovering in the 8 to 10%, no, 10 to 12% of the overall market sales. So in your market, you would expect to see $40 million in sales, and you're hovering right about that number. So you are on par. Typically, when you see ultra-rural communities or communities that are significantly underserved by their local market, you'll see those numbers start to crest 12%. But right now, you're very much on par, and it's just the same issue that everyone is dealing with. So, and again, they're in there, and if you have any questions about the specifics, once you dig into it, feel free to reach out. So that's kind of the foundation from the market data, and that leads us into the current image. Now, this was developed about 8 years ago, and this is what you guys have been using. Now, there is a lot going on here, okay? In fact, I had to get my head wrapped around it. I literally had to open up the file and like divide all the pieces out to figure out what is all this stuff and what's it for. Now, one of the biggest things, and I want to not jump ahead because I'm going to try to convey some different points here, but Niles Main Street is an organization. And one of the things that the Main Street world has done very poorly is separate out the difference between the destination that you are promoting and the organization that's bringing vibrancy and life and viability to the district. So the best way I can describe that is Main Street is your name and downtown is your place. I can't tell you how many times I've heard communities complain about, why is it called Main Street? We don't have a Main Street. Our Main Street's Walnut Street. Or, oh, so you're Main Street? That means that when I'm on the off street, then I don't matter. You know, Brass Eye, we don't matter because we're not on Main Street. This is the organization. The fact that you feel compelled to integrate Michigan in because we know that Niles, Ohio, and Niles, Illinois, that's a destination concept. That has nothing to do. But like, nobody is going to be confused that Niles Main Street is putting on an event in a different state. So there's a little bit of combining concepts. You know, you've got your whole collection of clip art, everything from storefronts to patio bistro tables to coffee cups and guitars, and you are obviously artistic because there's that splash of paint.
Is that what that is?
That's I think what that is. Yes. Oh, it's dirt. I'm sorry, it's dirt
So
from the dig.
even more obvious.
Even more obvious, right? You've got this downtown revolution, which again, the concept of a downtown revolution. How long is a revolution going to last? You know, how long before you figure out that you've been successful at that? I mean, the great thing that we heard is in the past 18 months, we've really started to see and feel a positive turn and a positive momentum in downtown. So understanding what is the role of messaging like that. And then there was a whole host of these different little variations of eclectic shops, foods and finds, get your groove on, dig in, blah, blah. You know, there was everything. So essentially what you all had was you all had a Swiss Army knife. Now, first of all, these are heavy to carry around in your pocket and they're not good at cutting down trees, you know? So we want to kind of reinforce and kind of go back to that fundamental, let's make sure that we have the right tools for the job. Again, I designed plenty of logos in 2011 that need to be redesigned in 2019. So I'm not being critical of the effort. I just think that this is kind of a testament that we're not in the same place that we were. There was a gigantic focus 8 years ago on the archaeological dig. And an archaeological dig is not necessarily in line with the convergence of arts, this kind of living history, the coolness, the music, all the different things that we're starting to see in addition to the cool businesses. Now, we talked about the organization, destination brand. Currently, when you look, what you really have is you've got multiple organizational identities, but there isn't anything that would be considered this disconnected destination brand. And this is really, really important. Like, you don't want to go out and use the city logo as the destination brand because that signifies official, you know, actions and works of the city. If Lisa irritates somebody in a downtown merchant, then they're going to abandon promoting downtown. And Chamber, oftentimes they're a member-focused organization, so it's like, hey, if you're not a member, you can't use our stuff, right? So being able to figure out how to fit all those together. So with those brand elements, the way that I typically approach it is instead of that Swiss Army knife, you need to have a well-stocked toolbox. In that toolbox, we have a defined color palette. We've got a series of typefaces to select from. We've got our approach to our graphics, and we have our message. Now, going through, reviewing the latest update to the website, really nice work on that refresh. 2 colors featured in there, this kind of nice red and kind of a teal blue. They feel alive, they feel contemporary. What I wanted to do was I wanted to fill that palette out and give you a couple more so that we had kind of a 4-color palette. You deserve 4 colors, you're the place of four flags, and I know that those of you that are tired of that are tired of it, and I get it. But I do want to weigh in on this idea of 4 flags in that it does so much in 2 words. It talks about a very long history that is worthy of learning more about, and the idea of 4 flags tells more to a person that, hey, you need to dig into our story than a logo could ever illustrate. So we're going to keep that around a little bit, but you know, being able to have those 4 colors, it takes the 4 flags and it ties it to the 4-point approach of Main Street. It gives us a color palette that's vibrant with still keeping a spectrum small enough that it's not a rainbow. And, you know, rainbows can be difficult to work with. They typically end up coming off a little bit unprofessional. So keeping that spectrum tight enough to use. Then from there, with our typeface selection, what I did was I selected 2 different typefaces. I wanted a nice, bold serif typeface that was similar to what you had before, but not broken and all distorted. And just because you all were spending some time in the dirt doesn't mean that your entire identity needs to look gritty. In fact, I would actually say that the time is now for you to reintroduce that polish, reintroduce that clean, professional approach. The secondary typeface is just a traditional sans serif, gives you the opportunity to have a clean, contemporary companion to that. But what you start to see is the name is very, very attractive in this typeface. You're lucky to only have 5 letters. That's a weird thing that factors in, but you know, when you're trying to develop a logo for Bennettsville, you got a lot more to work with than Niles. So what you start to see is you start to see this evolution. It carries a similar weight, but it gives you a sophistication that maybe wasn't there before. From a message standpoint, I will give tremendous credit to the previous process. It was exhaustive. This is a list of potential taglines. There's some crazy ones on here. Again, the thing that I really want to reinforce to you is when you're telling the story of the community and you're telling the story of downtown, all you're doing is building the stage. A logo and a tagline cannot tell 350 years of a community. It's impossible. This is simply a springboard for storytelling. This is to build enough confidence to understand that you have stories that are worth telling. Instead of trying to cover all the bases with a logo that actually has appendices, you know? So I just really kind of landed on this concept of we want to keep it clean, keep it simple, and keep it expandable. I pulled a component out of the old logo with the star. I liked the fact that there was a star in the old logo and the 2 stars in the city logo. And when I brought it all together, I just landed on something that looks like this. Real, local, flavor. This flavor ties into this idea of the transformational strategy around food. The local really hits on a concept that came up over and over again. Simply calling something local is a lot more eloquent than saying 6 miles north of South Bend. You know, it kind of denotes that it is something that is easy to get to. And you are a community that is truly real. You have so many different stories to tell. It was amazing how some of the things that were the most impactful to me didn't really seem to come up at all in the previous comments. If I'm thinking about what community would I rather go to, one with an active archaeological dig or one that's on a scenic, beautiful river, I want to go to a downtown on a river all day long. You know, you've got this fantastic bridge downtown. You've got this, you know, you've got a pretty interesting topo grade change that happens in your downtown. You know, it's like you can always play up that you build your calves and come to Niles. But when you do a simple approach like this, what you start to see is you start to see a system that the expandability becomes pretty easy. Having a version that says established 1691, there aren't many people that can say that. You know, we had the privilege of working up in Sault Ste. Marie earlier in the year, and they're a little bit older than you guys are, but not by much. You know, this idea of revolutionary. If you're gonna tell the story, like Redcoats, that crams it all into one singular story. But being able to tell this idea of not only do we have histories that date back to the 1700s and the 17th century even, but we've got the origin story of the Dodge brothers. We've got family relations to Montgomery Ward. My God, we invented kitty litter. You know, so you've got those dynamics that you got to be able to tell the story, but you got to be kind of funny with it. And you gotta understand that that there are these different stories to tell. Being able to create the graphics that you can kind of build from. I tried to create. I took photos while I was here, and then created some of these supplemental graphics so that you'll have both vector and bitmap art to be able to take and run with. But then from the organizational brand, that was all kind of downtown in the place. What about Main Street? And that's where I brought the flags back in because I just felt like you had to. So I looked at the way that the flags had always been presented, and there really are two different main applications. The city logo with them draped, and then the Apple Festival with them four corners of a circle. Kind of rallying them together, going single color, make it less about what's on the flag and more about this idea of flying a banner, this idea that flags represent something, and they represent something that brings people together. Introducing those four colors that play into the 4-point approach and the 4-committee approach, it gives you that opportunity to kind of have this simple icon that can come to represent the efforts, and you can see they're even designed in a way where they're moving forward. It's like the flags are being carried forward. So a lot of thought into a very, very simple icon. How does that get applied? Old website, which was really busy. The new website, which is a really nice improvement, and then just kind of showing, I like to do what I call a 15-minute update, changing out the logo graphic, introducing some of the color into it, on a really good start there. Quick refresh onto the Facebook page. Again, graphic drop in, this is 10 minutes, making sure it makes its way into the business card in a professional way. You have to understand that the way I think about it, at least, your Main Street director is your downtown economic development director. Oftentimes, though, we treat them simply as the events coordinator. And there's a different approach there. We want to make sure that there's a professionalism and a cleanliness that operates well in that economic development arena. We talked a little bit about parking. You, like many communities, have a parking problem. The problem that you have is that you have parking that's available. A good Main Street creates a parking problem by having more people than we have capacity. So literally what I've done here is I've simply taken a satellite photo of downtown and highlighted every single place you can park. That's a lot of blue on that map. And you don't have a parking problem right now. You have a consumer motivation problem. They expect to be able to park directly in front of their business. Your downtown needs to be a destination. And with that destination comes the motivation to park and walk and experience. This tool really can remove a tremendous amount of heartache. I cannot tell you, communities, a customer walks into a store, they complain to the business owner decides that it's true and complains to everybody they talk to. Next thing you know, they want to build a parking garage at $22,000 a space, when all they really needed was $100 worth of business cards to say, hey, we got plenty of places to park. The other thing is, we heard a little bit about parking signage, parking notification. You're the city of Four Flags. Use flags to denote things. Use flags to denote parking. Use movement and color to denote these things that other communities might be using static, fixed signage for. Again, with Main Street being able to find its way into, just little ways that you can make that symbol become iconic. It's not iconic all by itself, it's iconic through use. So finding ways that you can kind of integrate it into different things. We talked about the role of the identity of DDA. Nobody really knows what DDA means in the general public, nor do they care. So what we actually did was we just created this very simple variation that pulls the shield out of the city logo and was funded by Niles DDA. This becomes a graphic mechanism to help people understand what is allowing certain things to happen. So next time DDA is up for renewal, next time somebody's complaining about, why in the world are you doing this instead of doing that? We need a police officer. We don't need planners. Well, guess what? Doesn't work that way. And this helps to tell that story. The system really starts to get fun when we get into brand extension. Brand extension is where you take all those tools in the toolbox and make its way out into the events. Now I have to tell you, event logos typically are not good. They're not good because the volunteers who are passionate about the event are trying either to make it too cutesy or they're trying to change it every single year. They're convinced that everything they do this year has to look completely different from last year. So obviously the big one, Hunter Ice Festival, fantastic event, fantastic history. So what I did was I simply tried to create something nice, clean, iconic, that it's almost so simple that you're comfortable using it year over year, so that your marketing and your merchandise is the thing that changes. You want to create a design consistency that allows the spotlight to shine on the differences year to year. You have a chili crawl. Currently, I found a chili pepper holding a chainsaw, right? Which is really clever. I'll give you that. I've seen jogging shrimp, saxophone playing crabs. This is the first chainsaw wielding chili pepper I've ever seen. But again, just showing where you could introduce a kind of logo system that ties into that. So this idea of fire and ice is something that I think is kind of cool, the heat, during that festival. So that might be something that you kind of play around with. Again, trick or treat, here we take the star out, we replace it with a witch's hat, be able to you can abandon the colors when they're colors that dictate what the colors should be. This wouldn't make sense in your branding colors because it's a Halloween event. That's not breaking the brand system. That's understanding that this is Halloween and let's not be weird. Third Thursdays, going through and being able to, again, build additional meanings into it, even though you guys don't do it, kind of concerts in the park, you can see other event organizers can tap into some of these same tools to create connectivity. One of the things that I was thinking about is street banners. Typically, we over-design street banners. We start from a white screen, and then we design until they feel balanced on that white screen, and then the moment we put them in the physical place, they just add clutter. So I typically like to keep things really super clean. I like them to be one color screen printed designs, so they're also affordable to accomplish. So I'm showing a 4-color variation here. I went a little farther than I normally do because I think that you all, being the city of 4 flags, this idea of 4 colors, 4 banners being in different places, I think that that's something that you all should explore. Just because I'm showing 4 colors, natural tendency is, we'll just put a different color on every light pole. Use the colors to help people understand the spatial relations. I'm actually showing a solid color per block. And what I actually did was I mapped this out so you can kind of see, you use the colors and have the colors wrap around onto your perpendicular nodes. So the pedestrian feels like downtown continues down those perpendicular nodes. You always hear those side street merchants say, nobody ever pays any attention to us. Well, these systems help to kind of wrap people around and help them to understand what fits. I've got a miscolored one, but you get the drift. So being able to kind of see how that all fits together, being able to have pedestrian and bike oriented, I call this guerrilla wayfinding signage. If you're familiar with Walk Your City, these are simple. These are not metal. They're like perforated, corrugated plastic. They go up in the dark of night. NC State master's student did this as his master's project, and he put these things up in Raleigh in the middle of the night, and they were up for a month before the city realized that they weren't another department in the city signs. And then, of course, they pulled them all down, and the community revolted and was like, hey, what happened to those great signs? So being able to go through and kind of integrate fun conversational signages that promote bike friendliness and walkability, but then also being able to think long-term about the wayfinding. We know you all have been talking about that for a long time. Wayfinding really is going to operate on kind of a citywide level. even though that funding might come out from a cooperation between the city and the DDA, the fact is it will need to be a citywide system. You're going to announce arrival at city limits. You're going to start to introduce trailblazers as people move through into your downtown district. So you don't overbrand these, okay? You don't put too much on this stuff. 3 to 4 destinations most. Being able to kind of go through and have, you want to design these so that they don't die. They don't go out of date too quick. And typically you're going to expect that these things are going to be out there 10 to 15 years. So you just don't put too much in the way of graphics. I leaned more on the colors that the city is using, knowing that those probably aren't going to change. So that's why we're doing black and gold as a base on the wayfinding signs. Now, you can have a little bit jazzier, maybe even pole-mounted entry sequences into the downtown itself, but we can see, perfect case study here, the original Main Street logo is still in play because we made the sign and couldn't afford to change the sign after we had adapted the brand. So you don't ever want to kind of implement yourself into being out of date. And then even in temporary signs, this was something that we've been doing for years, and I know you talked about seeing an example of this that I think John shared with you guys down in South Bend, but being able to have signs other than just for rent or for sale signs, being able to kind of stoke this understanding that a property is available. One of the cool things we started to see is people will actually go up and they'll put a chalkboard into a window and it says "I wish I was," and give local customers an opportunity to kind of weigh in on what kind of businesses they might like to see in that space. So you can see fun things with that, but again, this is getting the organizational credit behind it. This is something great the Economic Vitality Committee can do. Heard a lot of comments about a brochure. We know there is a brochure. Is it printed? Is it not? How do we keep it up to date? So just showing how that branding can make its way into those printed pieces, but then how the components can also make their way into merchandise. Like, it doesn't always have to be stuck in the same facet. You can create design variations that can make their way into merch that people want to wear. Most of the time, if you go into a community and you say, "Hey, do you have any t-shirts?" It's either a local high school t-shirt or it's what we call a car wash t-shirt. The shirt with 7,000 logos on the back, and you only wear it to paint or cut the grass. So being able to create merchandise that people want to wear, and then being able to create different adaptations of messaging and graphics that are more in the way of merchandising oriented. So it's not intended to be, "Oh, well, that's a new logo." It's just giving people ways to connect with the brand. Always wear a hat, so always design a hat. If you make it, I will buy it. And then, making its way over into the advertising as well, and showing how that layout and how you kind of highlight the different food types that you might have, or the different opportunities, the different art, the different activities that go on. And with that very simple approach of real, local, and flavor, it gives you infinite expandability. Like, the problem with the old system was there was a lot of different options, but it's almost like they were completely different options. And how do you know how to change outfits? Do you wear a tuxedo to a picnic, or it wasn't really common sense. It was kind of hard to figure out. Here, these simple words allow for endless expandability, and just do what feels right, because you're not going to break it. That's what's beautiful about it being simple. And then from there, one of the big things that we talk about is the implementation. What do we do with this? So the first thing that I'm going to give you is I'm going to give you what we call a brand touch manual. This will document all of the components of the system. It will show you what the typefaces are. It'll define what the colors are. It will tell you what file types you're getting, how to use those file types. So this really is intended to be kind of the handbook to not mess it up. We also have created this sheet called How to Be a Brand Partner. This is intended to share with local business owners, event organizers, and other organizations in the community, and it simply is a list of ideas of how you might be able to take advantage of this and use it. Now, we're not talking about using the Main Street logo, but we are talking about using the Niles and the downtown logo variations. And then we've created a comprehensive brand launch strategy guide. This is a comprehensive checklist of all the different things that you need to be thinking about over the coming years of rolling this out. There is no scientific order that is right. It all has to do with your community and what you deem to be the most achievable and lowest hanging fruit, and based off of your own budgets. But this just gives you a really good centralized way to think about, hey, what are we doing? What do we need to do? And then we're also, for the Main Street organization, including a brand score sheet, so that once a year or 2 years, you can just sit down, very quickly score your implementation, and help you to figure out these are the things we should focus on doing next. So that's what I was able to do since yesterday.
Man, you
Yeah.
really must have a toolbox in that
Oh,
computer.
I tell you, I would love to hear thoughts, initial reactions. Does it make sense? Do the components seem to fit together? Does this seem to?
I think it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Right. Good.
And the flag thing is pretty genius.
Yeah.
I've tried 100 times, but I've always left the country logos on the flags, and just because I'm tired of looking at the same thing for since I've been alive.
Absolutely.
Right.
And just that and I've even done a circle before, but it's always been a flat flag, and it never made sense.
Gotcha.
So I
Gotcha.
love it, man.
Awesome. Well, and I think that was the thing that was so interesting to me is this idea of 4 flags. It's such an interesting long story to be able to figure out, well, what does that mean and how did that happen? But at the end of the day, there's a lot more meaning because a flag in its nature is so symbolic. And I think that's part of the reason that I landed on keeping that star component as well, because the star component is such a simple, iconic element that just kind of makes sense and stitches in to so many of those stories. But it's not groundbreaking. It's not the kind of thing it's like, oh, that's so clever. It's not really clever, but it's appropriate, and it makes sense, and it helps to connect the dots. But I appreciate that a lot. I think that I understand that you see 4 flags everywhere. It's used on apartment complexes. It's like all this stuff. So it's easy to feel like, okay, that's played out. Please, whatever you do, don't do 4 flags. Look, I completely and totally get that. But it really is a very simple mechanism that I think we can breathe some freshness into by adopting some simplicity. And it still kind of reinforces and ties in with the look and feel of the city standard as well.
So it's, I think that working with 4 flags is really genius. I'm going to go away, look at everything's at, that's what.
Right.
But there's
There you go.
But the one thing you said is, if you want to go to an archaeological dig or go hang out by the river, you'd rather go hang out by the river, and you didn't work the river in the
So the river is a weird thing because it's all about access and access points. And right now you can be at the river, but being on the river is something that you're going to want to think about from more of an event-oriented standpoint. People are relatively simplistic in terms of, well, we need to incorporate the river in the logo, and then the next thing you get is a squiggle. You know what I mean? So the thing that, there are a couple things that kind of ran through my mind that I didn't have a good image of the bridge. But the bridge and its arches, from a graphic standpoint, are a really simple way to be able to bring this in. What I'd like to be able to show you, if I can grab a picture on the way out, is I think you can do something where you can integrate some of the banners into the bridge arches in a way that feels truly, truly custom. Either that or slightly more aggressive colored lighting in a way where all of a sudden you're starting to bring that to life. I'm sure that's already been thought of, but I mean, it's one of those things where now there's a meaning behind it. I think that there are also some additional variations. I had one at one point that literally said Niles on the St. Joseph River. I was like, it just feels clunky, you know? St. Joseph River is so clunky from kind of a logo standpoint that I think one of the best ways to engage it right now is the idea of an event strategy and then starting to make sure that the community has embraced the fact that you're a riverfront community. You walk around right now and there seems to be, I'm not exactly sure the business on the other side of the Eagles, but looks like a landscaping place that has a bunch of firewood.
Oh, you noticed that?
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean,
They'll be able to see
I,
that.
I live in a community that has a river that runs through our downtown. We invested well over $1 million in a multi-mile river walk throughout the community, and it took well over a decade before there was the first place that you could eat dinner and see the river. There still is nowhere that you can live and see the river from your balcony. There's been no catalytic private sector investment from the fact that we're a river town. And that's what I kind of want for you guys. I think that there's definitely sites. I mean, one of the things we were talking about before the meeting started was the idea of being able to recruit a hotel into the downtown, and that river view obviously would be a selling point. So I didn't want to junk it up by making a squiggle and saying, hey, we've taken care of the river. I think that the event strategy will be the best way to engage, and then it'll make sense for you.
And with the bridging.
Exactly. That's one of the reasons why I used that bridge shot as much as I did, was simply denoting, hey, there's a bridge in downtown. And I know that sounds kind of silly, but people pick up on that sometimes.
Oh, we have bridge bash.
Right. And what is it? Is it the Lightning Bridge Run?
Bring the light and back.
Oh, Lightning Bridge Bash. Okay, cool.
And that new bridge is based off of historical Berlin Bridge in the city.
Cool.
I appreciate
I typically am not involved in river squiggle. I have been guilty of river squiggle before, but I try to avoid it. So what's going to happen is first of all, we'll put this presentation. I'm going to post this on YouTube, so share it with everybody. Everything you see is in I will create a style document. Every single one of these saves 5 to 5 file formats. Version I already there the right places and put them together, and literally everything shared single stuff. So you'll be able to access this entire folder hierarchy. It's all super clean, it makes sense, it's common sense, and it's organized. It's not overwhelming necessarily, but once I prepare all the logos, I'll even create a thumbnail below that goes into that style for quick reference, such and such cool stuff. And it'll live online through that single link forever, so you guys can feel completely comfortable sharing that link with any partner in the community that's interested. And a lot of times we get the question, what do we need to do to protect it? What do we need to do to make sure that people don't use it wrong? We find that this kind of logo system, it's different than what we talked about yesterday with the city. You just want to remove the hurdles. There's, believe it or not, I've been doing this for almost 20 years. I've got one circumstance where somebody used a logo maliciously. For years, people were convinced somebody was going to take it and turn it into a strip club logo. So I'm not really sure where that motivation or fear came from. But all in all, the worst thing that's ever going to happen is somebody's going to take it and not know to hold the shift key down, and they're going to stretch it out, and that'll be the worst, damage that's done to it. So we say share it freely, because the more people that use it, the more people that see value in it, the more value it will have for the community. Well, thank you guys.